Hi, and welcome to the North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. My guest today is founder of both BioMass Solution and Restorative Ideas. From Middletown, Wisconsin, I'd like to welcome Jacek Chmielewski. Welcome, Jacek, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chrissy, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, so can you first tell me a bit about your background and your experience, especially as it pertains to the agriculture industry?
Sure. So, first of all, I am not. I wasn't brought up as a farmer, or I'm not a farmer. I'm more of a city person. However, my heritage, I'm 100% Polish, goes back to farming not too distant past. So, even the years that I spent, being young in Poland, I used to go to to my grandparents' farm, and they had all kinds of, activities going on there, etc. But anyway, to accelerate that a little bit, I was actually fortunate enough to be brought up on 4 different continents. My parents were in the diplomatic corps. So I ended up being in Africa at the age of 3, and then in Japan at the age of 7. And then after that, a little bit in Poland, and then got my undergraduate degree in the UK, in London, and moved over to the United States. It's been quite a while now. It's been almost, it's almost 31 years now ago for good. And that was really with a job after I graduated. So I'm a chemical engineer by profession, exposed to a lot of different cultures, exposed to a lot of different circumstances growing up. And now fast forward to today, I've been in renewable energy, renewable activities, and then now moved into sustainable as well as restorative or regenerative activities, especially in the last couple of years. And just one other thing to mention too, that I was the idea given and developer behind a plant that got built in Grand Forks, North Dakota, that's got the lowest or one of the lowest carbon intensity scores. So carbon impact from waste, agricultural waste, to ethanol. That ethanol is now sold into California and other low carbon markets. So
Really?
that plant got started up about 18 months ago. And now, since that plant started up, we're not really involved operationally in the plant anymore. But I kind of refocused on restorative and decarbonization activities, which really accelerated here in 2021, not just in the US and North America, but also in Europe and in Asia.
Right. Yeah. So I guess with your experience growing up on so many continents, how is your worldview different, or how has it been molded to really think about the whole globe? That's what I'm assuming, right? Rather than just the area you're from.
So yeah, thank you for that question, because it has been molded in such a way that I don't have any on personal level any issues with seeing how everything that we do as humans and also as nature is completely connected, and it's all really the same part of this all little small ecosystem that we live on, which is we call Earth and the Earth atmosphere. So to me, just implementing a solution or decarbonization solution is really really cuts across any kind of a border, because I was exposed to so many different cultures. I was fortunate enough to speak 4 languages at the age of 7. So I had really no choice. This is it. This is my normal reality growing up. And I can see that now being pretty important for all of humans. Like when we're dealing with decarbonization of carbon dioxide, CO2 does not know any borders. That does not know any gender, religion, or anything. It doesn't really care. It's just there, right? So it's kind of like a big problem that we have to take care of, and we should take care of it, cutting through any kind of divisions that we might have as humans, and just following what's going on worldwide with a lot more information and a lot of different types of interpretation of information. It's very easy to get drawn into camps and to get drawn into a certain way of thinking, this way or that way. I mean, in the end, there's only there's only one Earth, and there's only really one primarily one truth or one set of facts. And, I think we should all, accept that that's what it is. And, let really subject matter experts or scientists or folks that actually know and study these type of things, have a little bit of a louder voice, because I feel like that's not being yet quite heard. So,
yeah. So if we break it down right to the basics, can you explain what carbon reduction credits are and how that relates, especially to agriculture?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, I'm really operating right around a process called pyrolysis,
Okay.
and I've first got exposed to pyrolysis back in 2005. Myself being a chemical engineer, I studied it at college, but I probably didn't retain much of it, or didn't even know what it meant when you're at college, right? So in 2005, I started going to Iowa State University and started collaborating a little bit, or at least talking to some scientists over there that were really involved in turning agricultural waste in the Midwest, the U.S. Midwest, such as corn stover or other byproducts of heavy corn production region, into what's called biochar through this process called pyrolysis, which means you basically heat up the biomass, and you don't burn it, you don't combust it, but you fix the carbon by the process of heating. You kind of like concentrate the carbon in this final product that's called biochar. It looks like charcoal, or it looks like very, very dark substance, black substance, but it really has completely different characteristics. So how that relates to carbon dioxide, on a short cycle, any plant or any crop would take would use carbon dioxide as part of the process of growing and photosynthesis. So it actually uses airborne CO2 as part of what the plant is exposed to. And then it puts that as, it converts that through photosynthesis into biomass and into the root system and into the overall, viability of that actual crop or a plant. And then what we would do with pyrolysis is we would take, preferably the residue of any kind of a production, let's say a crop production, whether it be corn, or whether it be even sugar beets, or it could be wood, it could be woody biomass, anything that has biological origin. And by this process called pyrolysis or thermal conversion, we basically fix that CO2 that the plant used, and we fix it in a form of carbon. It's called a fixed carbon, or recalcitrant, a non-reactive carbon. And then that product, the biochar, could then be used in many, many applications, one of the main ones being soil amendment. So part of a mix of soil amendment, let's say you've got composted manure, or let's say you've got composted byproduct of agricultural origin, and you would add some biochar to that, and then you would apply it to your soil. And because that carbon in the biochar is so fixed and so stable, it has the ability to help to rebuild carbon underground in the soil. Right. So it starts acting like a building block. In fact, there was a pretty recent study that showed with one biochar application in a certain type of soil, the amount of organic carbon underground in 6 years actually doubled without any further additions of the biochar, because there was a better, agriculture, architecture, or communication going on underneath the soil in terms of nutrients, in terms of any microorganism, in terms of any other activity. And the roots and other parts of the plant that would then die off would then be incorporated into that whole carbon architecture under the soil, right? Mm-hmm. And then help to rebuild carbon. So the simple way to think about that is, with pyrolysis, we take the CO2 in the air, mm-hmm. we decarbonize the air, and then we recarbonize the soil. So we return it back to where it should really be. Because we're intensely decarbonizing, not just in North America, but worldwide. and it's a huge problem that doesn't get any press these days unless you're in this you're in that space. Hardly anybody talks about soil decarbonization or soil soil extinction, and at the current rate of depletion, that's really going to be the result if we don't change our ways. So pyrolysis and biochar basically puts a stop in that and fixes the sequestration issue for CO2 in the atmosphere and helps to rebuild soil carbon. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
For sure. And then how does it relate to farmers and carbon credits?
Okay, so for the carbon credits, so depending where you are, in the world, but if you're a producer of biochar, let's say you got some waste on the farm and you were able to have this machine called the pyrolyzer and produce biochar, you can actually get into the market of biochar-based carbon credits. There are a number of companies worldwide doing this. Some of the primary ones are Puro.Earth out of Finland and Carbon Futures, out of Germany, and then there are other exchanges developing for that. So there is a really robust and underserved market. So there is a lot more demand than there's actually available credits based on biochar sequestration that the producer can monetize. Now, when it comes to the farmer in the United States can tap into a practice that's called the USDA NRCS 808 practice, which allows the federal payments to be applied to a particular farmer if they incorporate biochar in their overall farming practice. And there's some other caveats to this. Ideally, you want to start moving away from a full till to a partial till or no till practice and some other practices around the farm. But that's a federal program in the United States. Right now, it's a practice, but it's about to go into the comment process for becoming a national standard or becoming a permanent standard in the United States. Now in Canada, I apologize, but I do not know of such a program. Perhaps you do, but I'm sure both Canada and the United States are pretty tied in a lot of the ways that we do things. So I'm sure there is something very similar that happens in Canada.
Right. Yeah. I don't know at a deep level, but I know both governments are definitely pushing forward to try to reduce that.
Yeah. And then, the other advantage that the farmer would have which would be not a direct payment for implementing this, but perhaps lowering of their operating cost would be to start incorporating biochar as part of their normal practice and as part of their strategy for crop rotation, etc. So with time, in vast majority of cases, the farmer would actually see a reduced need for synthetic fertilizer use. And they would also see that their water balance is improved because biochar, through its really high surface area and the ability to hold water, helps with the water balance on the farm itself. And in situations when you might get into a long spell of really hot weather, it provides you an extra insurance against drought. So drought protection is a big deal. So those are things that are right now seen, but they're not really defined in a monetizable way because every farm is going to be different, every soil is going to be different, and practice is going to be different. So it's a much more of a complex thing. But there's a whole bunch of pull-through advantages associated with this as well.
Right. Yeah. And I've also heard that biochar will hold nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and reduce the runoff into the water. And is that true?
That is true. That's a really exciting application, and we're actually looking into that. I'm part of a subject matter expert / contributor to a program in Wisconsin. I'm in Wisconsin, called the Agriculture Carbon Energy Water program, and biochar now is in the comment section as applicable to this particular program, and this is especially true for dairy production. Huge thing in Wisconsin, right? we're cheeseheads over
Yeah,
here.
for sure.
So, and any kind of runoffs or any kind of manure that's associated with that production, and that includes, as you say, the runoff issues, which
Mhm.
are, which are absolutely a gigantic issue. And in a lot of cases, even if a dairy farmer wanted to increase their production, and if they wanted to be regenerative, so they put a digester, they make renewable natural gas, they offset natural gas, etc., they might be limited by the permit because of the actual runoff limitations, right? So if they can capture, especially phosphorus nitrogen, and return that phosphorus nitrogen, and then have that, nutrient work in a much more efficient way, or have a much better selectivity because it's held within the biochar in the soil much better, that
Mhm.
will allow that farmer to potentially increase their production. So it has, again, a ripple effect. So I looked at biochar and how it could be applied in a farm in this, circular economy is a very well used term, but I look at circles within circles. So this is a multiple circular economy, because you get a feedback loop and feedback advantages as you're moving through this whole process.
Right. Yeah. So what is the process that you would go through, for example, with a farmer to identify and solve issues on the farm? So
Sure.
how do they
So,
know they need this, I guess, is the base question.
well, I would start with some questions around whether the farmer is actually, uh, whether financially and practice wise the farmer is in a really good spot, or whether, the farmer's seeing maybe higher commodity prices, but the input prices are killing any kind of a profit margin that they can make on a higher commodity prices,
Mhm.
right? So just look at where those two curves are running for the farmer and where they really want to go with that. And then I would also, look at, a size of the farm, and then what kind of a soil, what kind of crops the farmer is actually farming. Because biochar is going to be most effective on soils that are substandard, that are maybe somewhat depleted, that are maybe a little sandy, and where you have the bigger opportunity of rebuilding carbon right off the bat. You get a better immediate effect. I'm talking about immediate. I'm talking about a year or two, right? Whereas a long-term effect would be, multi-year. And then I would also see if what kind of size of operation the farmer has, and if they're generating enough residue or byproduct or something that does not interfere with the viability of their soil as it is, and if they have it, left over, to see
Mhm.
if there's an opportunity to even construct a small project and start having the farmer take advantage of making the biochar right on the farm itself.
Right.
Because
Yeah,
there's
that's a
something
good option.
Yes, because something to be said about leaving a lot of the crop residue behind on the soil. You don't want to remove all of it, but you want to also you don't want to leave too much of it on there. So
Mhm.
you got to strike that happy balance, right? Because it would be very unhealthy to completely remove all the residue,
Mhm.
and then you kind of reversing the good that you're trying to do anyway. So those would be some of the main drivers, and then obviously a willingness of the farmer to maybe set on this path. And there's plenty of examples throughout North America of farmers that have done that, and they're very successful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So even making a connection for that particular farmer to talk to a peer farmer somewhere else that went through that journey.
Mhm.
Because at the beginning of our conversation, I said I'm not a farmer.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be somebody who could relate to that fully, because I don't live that world. But if you have a farmer talk to another farmer,
Yeah.
then it's much more powerful, because then you have a really frank conversation, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, that's important. And so what do you think, in your opinion, what are the biggest issues that modern agriculture faces today?
well, I think the biggest issues, and this is more, you know, maybe North American centric, I think is the continued industrialization, or how would I say this? Yeah, basically based on an issue that we have with um, climate change, but also soil carbon.
Mhm.
And climate change would affect how quickly the soil carbon gets depleted. And then we're trying to, I think, deal with the agriculture like we would with a human being that has some kind of an illness or disease, and they just go and get a pill rather than dealing with the symptom, with what caused that in the first place. And we have a tendency to say, well, if that's the issue, I know so-and-so, and we're going to just throw this at it, right? And we'll solve that issue without looking at the whole system. So I think, rebuilding carbon and rethinking how the farming is done more, maybe into more of a permacultural or maybe more sustainable practices is probably a good way to go. So I think the government, or whether it be federal or whether it be state or province government, has a really big role to play in that, to maybe shield some of the farmers that choose to go that way.
Right.
Because there could be a dip initially as they're trying to readjust, and not every farmer is going to be able to, to bear that dip. But I think the main issues are, obviously the climate change, which is an issue for all of us, and then decarbonization, and then over-industrialization of the farming, and that has ripple effects, in my mind, on nutrition, on how we eat, right? How health of our population is steadily, but it's not really getting much better. It's maybe getting into more calories or more inputs, but they're less nutrient rich.
Mm-hmm.
They're depleted, right? So you have to be really you have to really look for really good calories in terms of your nutrition. So just changing those practices could also have a ripple effect on on the human population and animal population. So it's a whole big circle that I think we have to deal with, and I think it's a huge problem. But with huge problem come huge opportunities to do solutions as well, right? So
Right.
that's where
Great
we're at.
point.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So coming into 2022, what do you think we should be focused on, whether we're producers or end consumers, in industry?
I think and with a little bit of a bias, but the program that I'm involved with in Wisconsin, big part of that program is also establishing carbon accounting, full set of carbon accounting practices for the farmer, because I see, as a consumer of the farming product, the end consumer, the type of a population and the age group of the population that's really receptive to having a full visibility on where that product comes from, what carbon impact does it have, et cetera, is growing. These are the people in their 20s, 30s, maybe into early 40s that have been exposed to a lot more information relating to that as well. So if the farmer can engage on carbon accounting for the product, and get that all the way to the consumer, then the farmer can actually be helped in changing their practice to more sustainable, organics, permacultural, better farming practices, and then get paid for it. Because with carbon accounting, you can say, hey, I'm making a product, but that product is actually made in such a way. I'm taking care of the water, I'm taking care of the waste, the runoffs, I'm using less energy to produce the product. I'm paying attention to everything associated with that whole carbon accounting activity. And there's quite a few companies that we're involved with. We're also get involved with that a little bit, is that do full-blown LCA, life cycle analysis of a particular product. And that's part of also the Wisconsin program that we're engaged in right now. So we're hoping to implement it, and it looks, if fingers crossed, it looks like it might actually get in front of the the government in Wisconsin in the early part of 2022, and we're hoping that other states and maybe even other provinces can get some value out of that, because we will also already have a framework set up, and our farming communities in Wisconsin are not that different to a lot of farming communities in Canada or in Midwest or even beyond that. So
yeah, and I guess it's important to realize that producers need to be good stewards of the land, and I think that is important to producers as well, right? And take care of this earth. So I think those are really great points. And what do you think? What have you learned through the pandemic that helps going forward and helps your mindset going forward?
Well, I think through the pandemic, and maybe I have a little different point of view on this. I think despite all the damage and all the people that have passed away because of COVID, and I actually had COVID myself. I had almost no symptoms, but I went through COVID. I think what COVID on the positive side did is actually make the whole of humanity realize that there are problems that are worldwide, and despite all the problems with politics and governments, etc., we had to deal with it on a global scale, right? So we had to come together, and and slowly those voices that are divisive voices, whatever, are going away. It's becoming a little bit more like, we need to deal with this. This is going to stay here, and we need to come up with a solution. So I see that the pandemic might have been one of the trigger points, or for a tipping point, for actually finally starting to think about decarbonization, finally thinking about making the agriculture a driving force behind the change that we need to see, in how we treat the land, how we maybe utilize the land to sequester carbon, but also grow really healthy foods, and then how we affect nutrition, how we maybe even show as an example and educate a lot of people how it could be done, that it doesn't have to be this way, but it could be that way. So I think the pandemic, in a way, made humanity kind of sit back a little bit and think for a second. I know that's a really like a really general thing to say, but that's what my feeling is, that if without the pandemic, we would have been still probably doing things more business as usual. But I think pandemic, especially with climate change and global warming, it actually probably triggered that tipping point, because you see that tipping point all over the place happening.
Yeah, I agree for sure. So if people want to continue this conversation, where can they find you, and where can they find the resources that you're in touch with?
Yeah, so you can find me, as you mentioned at the beginning. I'm a principal and a founder of a company called BioMass Solution, so on biomasssolution.com, and I'm the contact person. And on the bri.earth, so which is biorestorativeideas.earth, and there's a contact page over there too. So, and my last name is spelled Chmielewski. So I know it's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But you can probably find me pretty easily if you just put down my last name, BioMass Solution, in Wisconsin. I'm all over the place.
Great. Yeah, and we'll put the links in the
if
show
you put
notes
the links,
well.
that'll be wonderful. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I have one last question for you. What really fires you up? What were you put on this earth to accomplish?
That's a good question. What fires me up is I have two daughters, and I have family that are younger. My daughter, one is 21, and the other one is 25. And they have a future. I want to have them have a future on this earth, and have a earth that's livable. And that's a main probably main driver. And I was blessed in having the ability to become a chemical engineer and travel, and I wanted really use my my skill sets to maybe show some connections that might have not been obvious to others, but also constructed in such a way that this is not some kind of just a dream with no reality. This actually has a lot of returns. This is actually profitable to do this. So I think there's been a misnomer with transition to complete renewable world and sustainable restorative world, that it's going to cost all kinds of jobs and it's going to cause all kinds of havoc. I think that's a huge misnomer. I think it's going to actually generate activity, and it's going to be far more interesting and far more inspiring, right?
Right.
So what does drive me? I grew up in a little bit of my time in Japan, and there was this expression called ikigai. It's a Japanese expression where you can actually find your calling, your skill set, and what makes a difference, and what's profitable, and kind of a combination of all of that in the middle of his ikigai. So with this, for me in renewable practices, and especially now in restorative practices through biochar and decarbonization, I think I'm pretty close to getting my own ikigai, finding my own ikigai, which means to me, and I get complaints all the time that I work too much, but I pretty much work every day of the week. I tried really hard to have Sunday off lately, but every other day it's a lot of work, but I don't really call it work, because it's what I love doing, right? But it's still work.
That's it. Yeah. So, I'd say that's the secret to life, right? It's just
that is a secret to life. You can find that
you're doing.
And because if you're doing something you hate and somebody pays you for that, it's basically somebody just giving you some money for you to spend time hating what you do. I mean, what's the point in that, right? And if you and it's not like I'm not knocking that down, because a lot of people find themselves in a lot of different life situations, and everybody's got their own story, right? Everybody's got, everybody's complex. But if you can find that, if you can steer your way towards something that's actually more meaningful, I think to me, that's the ultimate. If you can do that, because you'll be studying all the time, and you'll be, hopefully infecting other people with that as well.
Yeah, that's a great message. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Jacek. It was really great to hear your insight.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah. And thanks to all who are watching or listening. And if you want more information, like I said, the links are provided in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight YouTube channel, Rumble, and the podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And have a great day.
Thank you.